Good morning, everyone. This is Meg Moynihan at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. I am going to start my video so that you can see it is really I. I want to give you a very warm welcome to our webinar this morning, Shoulder to Shoulder, Men's Sheds in Ireland and Rural Minnesota. I work here at the department in the capacity of really focusing on the human experience of farmers and other people who are involved in agriculture. And this idea of men's sheds came via a colleague of mine at the Minnesota Department of Health who had met Phil Johnson, whom you'll hear from later today, and said, have you heard about this fascinating movement that's taking the world by storm called men's sheds? And the more I learned about it, the more curious I became. And evidently, a lot more of you are curious as well, because we have quite the turnout this morning. 260 of you have registered for this webinar. But this is, you'll hear more about kind of the evolution of men's sheds in the presentation from our Irish friends. But this is something that began in Australia in 1998, and now Australia has 1,000 men's sheds. In Ireland, they started in 2009 with one, and now they're up to 450. And it's finding traction in many other countries, including the United States, where we have the United States Men's Shed Association, and our state of Minnesota, which has 5 men's sheds. And I understand that there are a number of you who are from other states and want to welcome you also. I just wanted to give you a little inspiration and kind of amazing view of who you are on this webinar. It's everybody from the farmers and ranchers that I typically work with in my work to, well, you can see on the screen lots of social workers and public health, librarians are here, educators. We have extension and farm business management. We have people from the philanthropic community. And we also have people from other men's sheds, men who love their sheds so much that they have tuned in from Australia, or in one case, we have an official chair warmer from Mound, Minnesota here, who's participating. And so this will give you, I think, a context as you think about men's sheds through the course of and after this webinar about what they might look like in your community. These are some of the peers in your communities who are also thinking about the same thing. Our presenters today are marvelous. When I called Phil to talk about could we do a webinar that was specifically focused on the interests of farmers in rural communities and who could we invite who would be able to talk about that experience, he said, I know some great Irish women. And we have Eva Byrne, who is the very involved with the Irish Men's Shed Association. Her colleague, Aisling Mcgrath, who is a PhD candidate from the Waterford Institute of Technology, who's been exploring the health benefits and implications and connections of men's sheds. And our very own Phil Johnson, who is the point person for the US Men's Shed Association. You'll hear from all of them through the day. We'll start with Eva and Aisling, and we'll end with Phil. Each will do a tour of their work and their insights, and we're leaving 15 or 20 minutes for questions at the end of the webinar. So some things to know, we are recording this webinar, and I want to make sure that you're aware of that. If you have any concerns, use that information how you will. We can also make the webinar available to you, the recording, if there are colleagues that you know who you wish had been here, well, we can do that. All of the participants are muted because there's so many of you. That was just really the only way logistically. We'd like you to ask your questions throughout the webinar. Don't wait till the end. My colleague, Rachel Paskowitz, who is an intern here at the Department of Agriculture and is going to be studying advanced graduate degree in rural mental health counseling. She will be monitoring the question and answer and also the chat for questions that come up, and she will help facilitate that question and answer period at the end. So as things occur to you, please enter them either in Q&A or in the chat. If you are having sound trouble, we had a little trouble yesterday during a sound check. There is an icon toward the bottom of your screen on the left that says, I think it says audio options. And if you click the little caret, you should be able to change your settings and see if you can tune that in. If all else fails, put your woe in the chat and we can crowdsource a solution for you. And then there will be an evaluation link at the end of this webinar, but also in a follow-up email, because we want to know what you think about this, what ideas it has sparked in you, and what you might need next to continue exploring that. So I am going to come to an end of my introduction, and we're going to go across the Atlantic. Eva, wave your flag so they know that they're really going to Ireland. And Eva's going to take over and talk to us about the amazing experience of men's sheds and for men in Ireland.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Minnesota, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak about sheds in Ireland and their development, and in particular, the success of sheds in rural Ireland. You could say that Minnesota and Ireland have a number of things in common: their population and the fact that your state, like Ireland, has counties, though the square miles of Minnesota is that of almost 3 times of Ireland. So indeed, I can understand you may face some greater challenges. So it's my hope today that you will leave with a greater understanding about sheds, the success of sheds in Ireland, the challenges and also the benefits to having sheds in your communities, and that our Sheds for Life programme aimed at improving men's health by being a member of a shed. Currently, there are 460 sheds on the island of Ireland. 160 sheds are in our cities and our outskirts, and the remainder are in our rural counties. And it's interestingly enough, the very first shed that ever started in Ireland was in the rural town of Tipperary in 2009. It was Johnny Voy, the founding member of the Irish Men's Sheds Association, that through his work in community development in Wexford came across the concept of men's sheds in Australia. He headed out there to learn more, brought back what he had learned and seen, and then spread the word on the benefits of sheds in Australia. In the meantime, as he was searching for a way to introduce and set up a national association, it was just simply by word of mouth from community to community that sheds began to sprout up everywhere. Unfortunately, in one way, sheds grew faster than John ever could have imagined, but the benefits outweighed the process of developing them under one umbrella. So other community organisations, like your county councils, partnerships, education training boards, began to support groups of men all over the country to create a shed in their community, keeping the sheds autonomous and simply being a support around the funding. And that's important because sheds can often tick a box for many community programs and lose their identity and very quickly serve someone else's purpose. So therefore, learn from Ireland like we did from Australia, and that the development of a national association is key to deliver on guidance and supports, and of course, the much needed programs for sheds that we will talk about in a few minutes. Going back to 2010, and in my role as a community development worker with the Netwell Centre, a leading research centre in ageing and later life, it was my remit to develop sheds in the northeast of Ireland. The funding stream that was provided initially by the International Fund for Ireland was a welcome resource to help support community information evenings for sheds and their benefits to men in rural and urban settings. This was important because the concept behind sheds is simple. There's no rocket science needed to set up a shed. It's just having a good understanding of the following. A good supply of the main ingredient in setting up a shed is very important. And that ingredient is men. As we say in Ireland, no men, no shed. A social space where members can relax, grab a cuppa and chat to others, but also a practical space where members can take part in woodwork or gardening. These activities should be led by the men. An inclusive and friendly atmosphere where everyone is welcome and supported. The social interaction in sheds for men brought about an overwhelming sense of good feeling about themselves, the connection with other like-minded men, and it was because of this the Irish Men's Sheds Association set up a programme aimed at improving the health and well-being of the participating men even more in a programme called Sheds for Life. On my journey and with the work I have done with sheds, I can honestly say that I know a lot of men in my community that would say that their life had been extended and enhanced by participating in a local shed. So Meg asked me to tell you a story about an experience that a man would have had in a shed. And I've many stories, but Tom's story from earlier years when sheds were only developing was the one that inspired me to this day to realise the impact that sheds can really have for the men in our communities. I got to know Tom because he attended the local shed not far from where I lived. And Tom was alone, his wife had passed, and his 2 children were both living abroad. Tom had been a farmer all his life, and when his wife took ill with cancer, he knew he wanted to take care of her. He sold his farm and bought a small house in a local village and cared for her until her passing. Tom would say he was overwhelmed when he found himself alone in the house, and it was one of his family, whom live in Australia, that encouraged him to look for men's sheds in his community. Tom did, but he struggled to take himself down there. But in the meantime, a health problem began to appear for Tom, and he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. But luckily, it wasn't advanced and treatment was given. Tom would tell you that he never really understood prostate cancer. He never ever spoke to anybody about it, until finally he did listen to his doctor and friends, went down to a local shed, and found himself, within weeks of attending, meeting 12 other men who had prostate cancer. And I remember him saying to me, I can't believe, Eva, there's stage 1, there's stage 2, there's stage 3, there's stage 4. And he became part of a group within that shed that came together to support one another, but also to educate themselves about their cancer. Tom is 93 years old now and attributes that to being part of a men's sheds. So in 2011, the Irish Men's Sheds Association was set up with a board of management. Funding was found through the health department and government to recruit a CEO and a number of staff to roll out a number of programs that supported the development of sheds in Ireland. One of these programs is the Support Volunteer Programme, which I manage. And its purpose is to recruit volunteers in every county to be a liaison between the sheds themselves and the National Association. We create networks 3 times a year in each of the counties, and biannually we have a national gathering. It was to be a global one before the pandemic, and we invite sheds from all around the world where possible to take part so that we can learn from each other. One of the key learnings is that sheds who have a working committee has proven to be more effective. There has been a recent toolkit that has been developed and can be used all around the world. It is the UK and Ireland toolkit, which will be officially launched on the 17th of August 2021 and available to all. The second programme, Sheds for Life, will be presented by Aisling in a few minutes. So Meg would like me to talk a little bit about sheds in rural settings here in Ireland. A shed set up in a rural setting should not feel disadvantaged because resources are often more readily available to them. For example, availability of premises. Sheds in urban areas and cities are plentiful with groups of men, but not necessarily premises. And sheds would often be found in shared community spaces, like resource centres, while in a rural setting, sheds can often be found on the grounds of a local parish, a Gaelic Athletic Association setting, or a community centre because there is vacant space available for them. Often villages or towns have vacant properties and are happy to support the men to convert them into a men's sheds. Rural sheds have often reported lower insurance costs, one of the highest overheads a shed can have. Local transport links are often already set up in a parish on hand to support the transport of men to and from the sheds. But also carpooling amongst the men is often more favourable as the men know each other a lot better. Communities in rural settings often have more involvement with the shed, and it would be found that financial supports locally would be greater, either in donations or fundraising activities. The ongoing challenges for sheds are captured every year by the National Association through surveys, focus groups with the men. And currently we are running a pre-budget campaign on behalf of the sheds with our government. And after our national survey, 5 key challenges have been identified. Now, these challenges come up every year for sheds, whether or not they sit within a rural or urban setting. Sheds are looking for a yearly capital sustainability grant that should be made available for all sheds to give the men an opportunity, especially this year, to recover from the COVID pandemic without the pressure of overhead utility bills. They're looking for the upscale and roll out nationally the successful and shedder-designed Sheds for Life programme initiative, so that every shed and every man in the country has access to this programme. Recruitment of men for sheds. Develop a national advertising campaign aimed at national television, national and regional radio and newspapers, and social media outlets, informing men all the time about the physical and mental health and social benefits of being involved in a shed, and encouraging men to get involved in their local shed. The government should review and reform the insurance industry to bring about better value for money and insurance policies for sheds. And the National Association itself needs more core funding increased to give more meaningful support on the ground. So I'd like to tell you about different types of sheds here in Ireland. Meg asked me to touch on the different types and if others would see them as a benefit to start in their organisation. And I know from our audience today, we have people here from the farming community, public health, mental health agencies, clergy, religious organisations, retired people. So you know now that sheds are predominantly set up in their communities by the men themselves. Shedders have learned that supporting their community, be it by building benches in local parks and schools, litter picking days, encouraging men whom are hard to reach men to come to sheds, supporting men to come to terms with onset of dementia, they get back twofold with support for their shed in kind and in donations. In Ireland, we have sheds in prison settings. A shed in a prison setting will be set up by the prison to teach the men the value of community, social engagement, and learning new skills. We have sheds in nursing homes. We know that men in nursing homes don't do as well as women in participating in social events within their care setting. And in response to that, there are a number of nursing homes that have created a shed space and spoke with their local shed and asked them to volunteer. Garda vetting, of course. But for example, the shed would make up bird box templates that they would put together and paint as an activity. Any male members, whether it be the brother or the son or of the man in the home, is encouraged to be there for that activity once a week. Headway is another organisation that supports young males with acquired brain injuries. Headway found that the shed space created within the organisation began to see more young men participating in workshops and activities than ever before. The Morning Star, a homeless centre where men are encouraged to attend activities during the daytime, in the shed space that has been provided for them. The Deaf Men Sheds, an organisation that created a shed space in their centre for male members so that wider community engagement became part of their daily life. So I'll now pass you over to my work colleague Aisling to hear about what the research says and our Sheds for Life programme. And I thank you for listening to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions at our Q&A session at the end. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eva. Hi everyone, it's great to be here today. So as Eva said, my name is Aisling Mcgrath and I'm a PhD candidate, and I'm also a researcher and lecturer in public health. And at the moment, my remit is men's health. It's all about working around ways we can engage men with health. And at the moment, what I'm working on is the evaluation and implementation of the Sheds for Life initiative, which is a community-based initiative that we bring directly to the men in the men's sheds. So today I'm going to talk briefly about all of that. I want to kind of highlight the impact that sheds can have on men for their well-being in general and the impact that Sheds for Life has had. If anyone's interested in reading a little bit more about the methodologies or the research stuff behind that, we have our impact report, which was recently launched. There's also a protocol paper. So I'm just going to signpost you to those there. So if you're interested in maybe running an initiative like this in a shed, there's a lot of information in those about how we did that and the approach that we took. So I suppose where we start with this, or why we came to the notion of working with the sheds to promote or enhance well-being for men, is that there is an acceptance at times that men are just a little bit more unwilling to engage with health, that they find it difficult to seek help, that maybe having meaningful conversations about health or even mental health might be a little bit more challenging. This belief can be so embedded in our societies, though, that it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy for men. So you can see through some of the quotes here where the men who participated in Sheds for Life at the beginning, you know, they really believe that it was just the perception out there is that men don't talk, that it's not something that men simply do, and that even more alarming, that it's actually a failing on the men themselves. And, you know, yes, it can be a consequence of maybe aligned to more masculine traits, such as the need to be strong and stoic and not show signs of weakness. But individuals can't be held accountable for systemic failures in our society, you know, that don't take account of things like the environmental, the social, the economical, the political determinants of health, and how gender intersects with that, and how that ultimately impacts how we engage with our health and well-being. So we're lucky here in Ireland because we do have a rich landscape of men's health research. We've got our men's health policy. We were the first country in the world to have that. We've got our Healthy Ireland Men framework. And those, I suppose, policies really understand that the health services need to take account for the ways that gender impacts health and ultimately men and also women's engagement with health. So why the men's sheds? You know, I suppose the first thing is that men's sheds are inherently health promoting. And for different reasons. So they're non-clinical and they're safe. So if you were interested in maybe as a community worker to engage with men, this would be a really good space to do that, because, you know, there's a safety, there's a familiarity, it's male specific, and that can be really beneficial in the sense that it's men only, you're in the company of like-minded men, you can share your interests, but also there's a safety in that, because sometimes some men may be a little bit more uncomfortable about talking about things like that, things about their health and with women. They offer a sense of purpose in terms of the things that they do, like the skills sharing. There's a sense of belonging there as well, and a camaraderie that's offered within a men's shed. So they are so health enhancing even before you bring anything else to the table. The sheds, I suppose, attract all men from all different walks of life, and they all share a wealth of experience and knowledge as well. So it's really important to kind of know that. But also, at times, sheds can attract men that are a little bit more vulnerable. They may be a little bit more at risk, or for a host of complex reasons might find it a little bit more difficult to engage with health and well-being or have conversations like that about health. Could be because perhaps their geographic location, social disadvantage, history of mental illness, and so on. So again, they're great spaces to go into to engage men, but also I'll talk a little bit more down the line about how you do that is so important, because if you want to try and formalize healthcare in an informal space, and you're going to meet a conflict there, so you have to kind of approach it very carefully. So Sheds for Life, ultimately what it looks like at the moment, it's almost like an added layer, I suppose, to the foundation of the sheds, what we do. So we bring a little bit of health and well-being to the sheds, and we bring it directly to them in the shed. And that's why it works really well, because again, it's in that safe and familiar environment. So it starts with a health check, and then there's weekly physical activity over 10 weeks. And they have a choice over strength and mobility training or a walking program. There's healthy eating and cooking skills as well. Then there's a mental health workshop. And again, that's very much around normalizing discussions around mental health in the sheds. The men also have optional components at the top. You can see those there. So they can choose different elements, and that gives them a sense of autonomy and control, which works quite well too. So things like oral health awareness, cancer awareness, diabetes awareness, suicide prevention training, which works quite well. We have had experiences of suicide in sheds. So giving the men the tools to be able to have those conversations is so important. CPR and dementia awareness as well. And these programs are co-designed, so the men really essentially identify what they would like to happen in their shed, and we try our best then to respond to those needs, and that's why it works quite well. So we've piloted Sheds for Life originally across 22 sheds in 4 counties. And you'll see here that there was an urban and rural spread there. So it's 36% rural sheds actually participated in that. We hoped to originally get 300 men to participate, and 421 men actually participated in the end, which is really a fantastic response. We estimated there was about 565 men in those sheds. And of that, then we had 421 participate, and we looked at their mean attendance rates as well. And so the engagement was around 73%. And for a group that can sometimes be hard to reach, difficult to engage in community outreach, it just highlighted that this approach is really good, that the men's sheds are great spaces to actually be able to engage and work with men and promote positive health and well-being. So some of the things that happened across this program, I'll just go through those briefly. At the health check, 79.6% of the men were actually referred to their GP or their doctor. And I suppose it just highlights the importance of this intervention, because for some reason, whether it be high cholesterol or extremely high blood pressure, these men were actually told to go to their GP straight away. So you can see from the quote here by one of the men's shed members themselves that this really does have the potential to be quite life-saving. Some of the men ended up getting cardiac stents inserted as a result of this intervention. You know, these might be men, particularly with farmers and things like that as well, that may not be the most proactive, I suppose, in attending their doctor and things like that. So it's a really good space to do that. When we followed up with the men, then almost 42% of them actually said that they did go ahead and visit their GP. But again, because of the cohort of men in the sheds, some of these men would have been quite older, more traditional as well. It was a positive result, you know, that they actually went ahead and did that. Their days physically active increased significantly, and it remains much higher even a whole year on. The amount of times that they spent walking, their physical activity self-efficacy, so their confidence to be physically active and sustain that activity significantly increased as well, which was really important considering as well the older men that could be in the sheds too. And we know from the most recent WHO physical activity guidelines that some physical activity is just better than none at all. So it's great to see the men get physically active. And why the sheds are really supportive of that is because that group interaction, you know, so they're doing it together. There's a bit of healthy competition. It's fun. There's a bit of crack, as we say in Ireland, so it's not the drug, a bit of laughter and stuff. And also those meeting the physical activity guidelines significantly increased. You see that jump there from 31.2 to 51.5%. So that was really great to see. And how we look at our own well-being is so important to us. It is completely subjective, but yet it really is a positive indicator how well we're doing in life in general. So the men who participated in Sheds for Life significantly increased their life satisfaction. So just how satisfied in general they felt with life, their scores significantly increased. But in fact, they were actually quite high at baseline, and many of the men attributed that to just simply being a member of a men's shed and how positive that was for them. Their life worth also significantly increased. And there was a significant and sustained increase in those reporting that they liked to seek information about their health. And that was one of probably the most special findings about Sheds for Life. And, you know, bringing this to the sheds just to get men that would otherwise not engage with health, you know, to actually be willing to do that now. So it's a really, really important preventative strategy. There was also significant and sustained improvement in their self-rated health as well. One of the, I suppose, really important things about sheds, or one of the most positive things about sheds, is the camaraderie that it offers, the social capital, and how it can mitigate against loneliness and social isolation. So there was a significant increase in feelings of close support, trust, and belonging as well. So while the sheds offer that naturally, I suppose Sheds for Life kind of enriched that by, again, normalizing conversations around health so that they would have more meaningful conversations. And that really just, I suppose, heightened that sense of social support that they had for one another. So you can see from the quote here by one of the shedders, it brought us closer together, interacting together, you know, we're sharing things, and that's making life better for us. We also looked at their cooking skills, which again, for some of them were isolated men, it was, you know, something that was quite important. So after the program, they were preparing their own meals more frequently, they cooked more often, so there's a significant increase in that too. They had more confidence in certain constructs that we looked at as well, so cooking using raw ingredients rather than getting fast foods, following recipes, getting their own groceries, really simple things, reading food labels, having an awareness about basic nutrition. In terms of their mental well-being as well, that significantly increased. And it was even just, again, around normalizing the conversations, but challenging that narrative. Some of the men are so traditional, and maybe from older generations, that they think mental health is only, as the shedder said, for people in institutions and beyond. It doesn't affect them, but it's, again, just getting them to realize that everybody has mental health, whether it be positive or negative at that time. So it was great also to see that the number of men who would be comfortable having a conversation about their mental health actually significantly changed too. So even just to get them talking about that is so protective for their mental health. In terms of the suicide training, there was an increased willingness to talk openly about suicide. And this is something that is very important, especially for men, as we all know. So we'll just call that out there. You know, just being able to ask that question, are you thinking about taking your life? That could seem really, really absurd to somebody if they haven't gone through this type of training. But even just asking that question can actually be so life-saving. So it's really important that they were able to do that. And you can see again from the quote here, you know, everyone shied away from it at the beginning, thinking, well, that's really depressing, don't really want to get involved in that. But, you know, it really did open their eyes, their ears and everything else and all of their senses to have more of awareness about this. And then just generally, I'll briefly touch on these about, they did digital literacy, so it's getting online. Again, for maybe more rural men or for men that are a bit older, this is going to be really important. Actually, it is very important now, even with COVID, how many things are being digitalized. And we do have that digital divide between our generations. So they felt more certain in connecting, getting online, increased awareness as well around diabetes, performing CPR, understanding of their oral health and cancer awareness and so on. And I just wanted to highlight this briefly. These are some of the strategies that we use to bring a program like this to the sheds. It can be quite complex, but it's really important that the men are at the center of all the decision making that you do. So if there is anyone out there who is a practitioner or a community worker that's really interested in maybe working with men and wants to use the shed as a medium to do that, the strategy or the approach you take is what's so important. So active recruitment, you know, going out and actually actively recruiting the men and talking to them about that. You can see some of the quotes here, you can read them yourselves as well. Tailored and targeted, allowing the men to tailor the program to suit their needs. And then I suppose identifying what organizations may be capable of actually rolling out a program like that. That it's targeted as well, so it's going straight into the sheds. Even the cooking classes were delivered directly in the sheds, whether they had the facilities or not. We just kind of, I suppose, adapted as best as we could. And that's so important again, because they're in a safe, familiar, non-clinical space. Trust building is really important. So spending time building a bit of rapport, building a relationship. Informal delivery is key. So everything has to be conversational. There has to be a bit of laughter. It has to be fun. So anyone coming in to deliver a lecture or with PowerPoint slides, forget about it. So it's really just about keeping it as informal as possible. Working with partners who really understand the ethos of the sheds as well. So that's really important too. Participatory research. So everything that I do in my research and the evaluation, the men are involved in each step. They have a say over it, they have autonomy and control over it as well. And then they really feel like this program is a program that they have, that's theirs. So it's a sense of ownership. And they have choice over it. And also it's respecting the informality of the shed, that the men can come and go. So they're never forced to participate in anything like this. It's really what they define it to be. It's co-designed. So again, they design it as what they would like it to look like. Engaging leaders and champions on the ground in the sheds can work really well for any initiative that you try to roll out in sheds, or even if you're trying to start up a shed or, you know, keep a shed going. So Eva would know loads about this, but there are men that are really, really supportive of the sheds and will work with you to actually, you know, I suppose encourage men that might be a little bit more vulnerable or hesitant or anxious to actually follow and, you know, that social support is really great. The use of hooks as well. So anything that you can get that might draw them in at the start. So the free health check was a bit of a carrot, as this man will tell you here. And things like the CPR, anything that's like life skills or practical based, they really like that. Removing costs, so just getting rid of that barrier if you can at all straight away, so that it's just accessible to everyone. Providing structure and clarity, you know, keeping things really clear and really straightforward. Strengths-based approach. So as I alluded to earlier, the men have such a wealth of experience and knowledge that they can bring to the table. So it's about tapping into that and getting them to share that with one another, and respecting the shed environment. So you can't really stress that enough. So just having that respect for the men, respecting that it's their space. So if you're going into work in one, that you really work very closely with them and make sure that you identify a really appropriate model. Just want to highlight this really briefly as well, because I feel that this really highlights the benefits of the sheds, but also what can happen when a shed closes. So we were following men over time and during COVID as well. So the graph on the left demonstrates just two cohorts of men. You've got your red and your green line there. So at pre-shed, we measured what it was like, basically their loneliness scores before they joined a shed at all. You can see that they were significantly higher. Then at baseline, you know, there was a significant drop in their loneliness or their feelings that they were lonely. At 3, 6 and 12 months, again, we followed them. Both cohorts were very similar up until the 6-month point. And the red line that was experiencing COVID had a significant increase in their loneliness scores, and that continued to increase at 12 months. And you can see here that the graph on the right are the shed members that fell into the lonely category. So essentially what it meant is that the shed had closed, and those with a score of 6 or higher on this scale were, I suppose, considered at risk for loneliness. When the shed was open, that was 1.4%. At 6 months into COVID, that had risen to 29.7%. And then 12 months later, it was 39.2%. So 39.2% of those men were now at risk of, I suppose, loneliness and social isolation that was detrimental to their well-being, essentially. So it really highlights the absolute importance of sheds to protect against loneliness, to promote social capital, and really to enhance well-being, because I suppose we're all creatures of connection, you know, so it's so important to us all. And I just want to leave you with this then. I think what I wanted to highlight is that the sheds are so gender transformative, and what that means is changing the narrative, that narrative that I talked about at the start, and that men are willing to talk about health. They're willing to engage, they're willing to be proactive to protect their own health and well-being, but it's just the approach you take and the environment that you do that in is so important. We always refer to the sheds as being a shoulder-to-shoulder kind of ethos, whereas in fact, it's almost evolving from that as well. So Sheds for Life kind of demonstrates as well that yes, shoulder to shoulder is great, that men will talk for practical things, but also if you just give them the tools to actually talk face to face, they'll do that too. It's really about normalizing the conversations for the men and challenging, I suppose, their masculinities, but in a way that it's not to undermine masculinity, because it is such a protective thing for men as well, but almost highlighting it as that talking is a manly thing to do, that it's brave, it's courageous. And you'll see the transformation in some of the men here. So they went from saying that they will talk in the right environment, and before they didn't want to talk about it, but now they will. And just before I finish up, I want to play this video, because I think maybe it's better off that you hear it from the men themselves and they really capture the essence of what it's all about. So I hope you can sit back and enjoy this, and thank you for listening to me. And after this, then I'll pass you on to hopefully it will play.
The Irish Men's Shed Association started an initiative called Sheds for Life back in 2017. It's a dedicated men's health and wellbeing initiative that covers aspects of physical, mental and social wellbeing. We collaboratively work with the men to find out what their needs are, what their interests are, and what way they find is the best way to approach men's health in the men's shed setting. We piloted various different components of programmes with leading healthcare organisations in Ireland, and now we've collaboratively put them all together in this informal 10-week programme.
The Shed for Life. I find this great because it helps focuses my mind, and it's great to get out. I prefer to walk with people rather than my own. Same bunch of lads nearly every week, and as I say, the crack is 90. Again, that's what it's all about, you know. The cooking classes are brilliant as well. The lady who comes here, she's brilliant. She's very interesting. She makes the whole cooking thing quite simple, quite easy. To have these facilities and people come in and talk to us and help us along with this kind of thing. Again, it's another wonderful thing. It's mighty, you know.
Sheds for Life programme I think is brilliant. Coming from a paramedic background, I believe in what they're doing. The food programme and the walking is very good. The computer course is excellent. I would be very technically illiterate, but I've come on in the few weeks that we're doing it, learned lots. The whole thing of the shed is fantastic. In just the year that we're here, you can actually see the benefits, both mentally and physically. Guys are different, they're springing their step going, and anyone that in a bit of maybe social isolation, just fantastic.
It's a weekly thing. On a Tuesday we go and we train, do a little bit of soft training, you know, for our age we don't do anything too hard. But yeah, it's great, and it's great for the camaraderie that brings us closer again. You know, you limber up and then you do a little bit of like light weights, but look, everything works. And again, you're together with a bunch of lads, and it's great for, it's a tonic. Through the men's shed, it's just crack. And it just lifts you up out of, you know, if you're feeling down, you go up there for the half an hour and the next thing you're in top form. If men can talk about their problems, their mental health, just to unload what's on your head, and that's the men's shed. You can go in and you can unload, because the men will listen to you. And I think that's just fantastic.
I think it's brilliant. Tops by today, I have to say. The way Jenny of the Diabetes Ireland conducted it was amazing, that she sat among us. It wasn't a she and us type scenario. We were all there as a group. She listened to everybody and she explained everything in a phenomenal fashion. We share everything. Let it be good, bad or indifferent. It's shared, and as you probably well know, life teaches you that a problem shared is a problem halved. Everybody's equally important, shall we say, here, and we all treat one another with respect. So yeah, I became a member, and ever since that, on a daily basis, you feel better and better and better about myself and participation. And rather than being a single individual sitting up at home feeling sorry for myself, I'm now part of something that's wonderful.
What we're hoping to learn from Sheds for Life is really what works best for the men in the sheds. All of these men are here ready and willing to actually take part in the programme, and again, they designed the programme so it's what they want it to be, and when they take ownership they realise, yes, we can actually engage with health.
The impact we want to see through Sheds for Life is giving the men an opportunity to engage in health on their terms and in that informal setting of the shed. Outreach and finding a way to deliver a programme on the men's own terms and where they feel most comfortable is really, really key to Sheds for Life. We're proving that men can do health, it's just the approach that you take is so important.
So thank you so much. I'm going to pass you over to Phil. So whenever you're ready, Phil.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Phil Johnson, and I'm Managing Director for the U.S. Men's Shed Association. Since our inception in 2017, we really have worked hard with other national associations around the world, really to learn from their experiences. And because they've been through everything we're going to be going through as we develop men's sheds here in America. Now, the COVID pandemic did impact us, as with all parts of society. And we found that as the pandemic is receding now, men's sheds activities are growing here in the US. An interesting aspect of men's sheds here in the US is that we find sheds that receive help from the community organizations in getting started seem to get going a little faster, but at the same time, they are working with a variety of organizations, educational institutions, living communities, and churches who sponsor the sheds and help them get started. Okay. The question I am asked the most often when speaking about men's shed is, what do guys do? What do you do in men's sheds? After all, men's sheds aren't like a golf club or a tennis club where there's one specific activity. In men's sheds, they do a variety of activities that the men choose themselves and are all fun and interesting. Some of the different types of activities are unbelievably varied, but they typically fall into a couple categories. One is doing community service in the communities where the men's shed is. Another is having speakers come in or having men from the shed talk about themselves, say their hobbies or past experiences. And finally, men's sheds like to go out on field trips. The guys all like to get out and see interesting things or learn things, such as trips to the local fire department. They might go to a museum or visit local companies that are doing interesting things themselves. The men in the communities both really benefit from men's shedding here in the US, as Eva and Ashlyn have mentioned, men's sheds offer significant health and well-being benefits to men, as you've seen earlier, and really are social prescription for men to connect with each other. It's very informal, and the benefit to the communities that these men's sheds are in, besides the well-being of the men themselves, is that community service can typically be very significant. In just one community, Hopkins, Minnesota, for instance, the Hopkins Men's Shed has contributed over 600 hours of community service in its first 4 years, and all that is done for free for the community. Okay. A key principle of Men's Shed is really acceptance of others and providing a welcoming environment to everyone who comes to participate. So the value of diversity is key to the way Men's Shed operating. This also leads them, excuse me, here in the US to volunteer their time with such group as Alzheimer's and Dementia Services, supporting cross-generation connections, and also supporting the needs of immigrants and other new arrivals. Here in Minnesota, Men's Sheds have been also studying the experiences of Australia and other countries in working with Indigenous peoples and communities of color. Minnesota Men's Sheds have banded together to conduct research into men's sheds in the rural part of our state. We find they really can be an approach to reducing social isolation and loneliness, which retired farmers and other rural senior men typically experience. The first phase of a research grant we're doing for the National Institutes of Health through the University of Minnesota is to do some assessments of by surveying communities around the state to determine if the Men's Sheds model could be of help to improve the social connections between senior men and their community members. Initial counties and communities being surveyed here in Minnesota include Polk, Isanti, Crow Wing, Morrison, Sherburne, Beltrami, and Wilmer counties, as well as others. Okay. U.S. and Men's Sheds here in Minnesota would like to ask for your help in providing greater awareness of men's sheds across the state. If you're aware of a community organization or individuals who might be interested in providing support of, say, sponsorship or a men's shed in their community, please let us know and or have them contact us directly. We appreciate you all attending today, and I'm looking forward to talking to you in the future about making life for our senior men and the communities they live in better for all Minnesotans and the U.S. Now I hand control back over to Meg and look forward to answering any questions you may have for Eva, Iceland, or myself. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And I, in turn, am going to turn this over to our Q&A facilitator, Rachel Paskowitz, and acknowledge that we have so many more questions we can answer that we'll look into doing a follow-up. But Rachel will facilitate answers to a few questions this morning.
Awesome. So many great questions have been asked this morning, but we're going to start with one from David W. And he asked, how do you get to attend men's sheds? Word of mouth is great, but it takes time. Do you have any other ways to get men in the door? Because once they're in the door, I'm sure they'll stay.
Well, in Ireland, I can answer that one. In Ireland was that we created a number of information evenings to bring the men together in the community to give a full brief of, the opening hours, some of the activities that would be created and what ones that they might like to see happening there. So I guess information evenings, if the shed hasn't been established. If the shed has been established, I suppose it's about a key member of the committee welcoming that man in and going through the shed, showing him what happens within that space and making him feel very welcome. And, it is difficult, that first step across, but once it happens, the results have always been very, very good. Maybe, Bill, you want to say something, how it works?
Sure. We find in Minnesota, as Eva just mentioned, that holding an information evening or meeting works very well. Important for us has been involving the media. So where we might have a article or a announcement of an information meeting for a community about men's sheds, or we do radio interviews. And most recently, we even did a television interview for a Fox affiliate here in Minnesota. So these are ways to reaching out to men. The benefit of working with existing nonprofits or organizations is they have their own lists of members and their own contacts among seniors in their communities. So we really depend on them a lot to help get the word out and announcing in local newspapers or other areas. I hope that answers the question.
Awesome. All right. Another question we had from Anna L. It says, these sound like a very intentional set of trainings for the men, but I thought the men get to decide what they like or what they do. And then she asked, do all sheds engage in this sort of health-related training?
I can say for Minnesota, what we learned from the Australian men's shed is the term health by stealth. And what that means is we do want to help improve the health and well-being of our men's shed members, but we don't do it by beating on their heads. The biggest thing I find about men's sheds is the ability for men to have other men to ask questions about. So Fred might ask Bill, I've have been having trouble hearing, but I don't know if I should go see the doctor or what I should do. Well, the other fellow may already know that, or other men in their shed may have had similar situations, and they're pretty good at telling men, no, you really need to go out and see the doc about that. So it's more that informal information passing. There aren't really any trainings in healthy living. We do have people come in regarding topics like Alzheimer's or suicide prevention that may chat, but these are very informal and really focused on specifics for older men.
I can come in there too. So I think if that was in reference to the Sheds for Life program, it is a structured program, I suppose, in terms of the health and wellbeing aspects that are on offer. But the men absolutely do what they want to do in their own sheds. But it was this Sheds for Life, I suppose, evolved through an express need for the men and the association in Ireland to actually support them in their health and well-being. So I suppose that even shows how progressive it is by just being in a shed. Men start to realize, actually, do you know what? We could use this as a setting to maybe start talking a little bit more about our health and well-being. So while some of it is structured, they absolutely do not have to participate in it. Not every shed may want to, but it is a program that we currently offer here in Ireland, I suppose, and we're trying to scale it up so that each shed has the option to participate in it.
I would like to say too that here in Minnesota, we look on Ireland with envy on all the partnerships they've already developed in the health community and other areas. So certainly as we get going here in Minnesota and in the US, we're looking forward to making those connections, and our research grant through the University of Minnesota really has provided us an avenue to reach out to these other nonprofits and governmental agencies already. So I think that's going to be a bigger part as we move forward here in the US.
I think, Aisling, it might be fair to mention that there's probably in and around 50 organisations, and a memorandum of understanding was developed with the Irish Men Association and these agencies. So that's key, and you know, without going into real detail now, that is something maybe we could support as well from Ireland.
Awesome. All right, we only have time for one more question, but we will be sending out a document that lists all the questions that were asked today with some answers for you guys. But it's kind of a 2-for-1. We had a couple questions regarding the leading of the groups and the presentations that are brought to the men. And Heather J asked if the men are the ones leading the groups and bringing the programs to the men. And then along with that, Catherine B asked if you've found that having men present is received better than if a woman were to present to the men.
I'd like to speak to that because having been involved with helping start the 5 sheds in Minnesota, it really is the case that the men want to do activities that come from their ideas. We might have be able to suggest things that other sheds may have done, but really it's up to the men themselves to decide what it is they want to do. And here in our state, what we try to help with is just provide maybe access to, you know, contacts in those types of activities that we can provide the individual sheds.
I suppose Aisling can.
Sorry, Evie, you go ahead there.
Well, you might know better, but like in sheds in general, if they want to talk on cancer, or they want to talk on dementia, or whatever it is brought into the shed, it has never been an issue whether it's being presented by a woman or a man. It has made no difference whatsoever to the setting and to the learning. I guess the toolkit that I touched on earlier will be a huge resource for all of you in the United States, because years has gone into its development. It's UK sheds, Scottish sheds, Irish sheds, all research and focus groups and listening to what the difficulties and the challenges setting up a shed is about. But for sure, the one thing that we did learn is that sheds who have a really solid, I suppose, committee, we like to call them working groups as well, because we don't like to have it too formal. They're very successful. So maybe Aisling, you could add something on there.
Yeah, look, the men's sheds are autonomous grassroots organizations. They're absolutely peer-led, you know, they just define what they want their shed to look like. In terms of if they actually request something that's a little bit more structured, like maybe a cancer awareness.
Well, I can say too in Minnesota that we experience this, and we find that they can be pretty interesting. We've had men who served on nuclear submarines. We've had folks talking about nephews who are in the space program. We even had one speaker who had been a carrier pilot and showed videos of planes crashing that he was shown in his training for landing on aircraft carriers. So the men are a great source and take great pride in talking about their own experiences.
I don't know what happened there. I think maybe we cut across one another, but I was just saying that if they wanted to do a structured talk, then normally they would appreciate anyone that had the expertise to deliver that. So it's never been an issue. Eva and myself have spent hundreds of hours in the sheds, and they've always responded really courteously, really well to us as well. And they know that we're there, I suppose, try and make things better for them. So it doesn't really matter in terms of what gender delivers anything. But I suppose it's important that in terms of the men's sheds generally, that male space is protected too, because it is, you know, really health enhancing, and it's a safe space for some of the men that would benefit from that.
Wonderful. And with that, we have come to the end of our hour together. I hope you are leaving interested and inspired. I don't want to use the metaphor of a match and gasoline, because many of us are in drought and that dry and fire is the last thing we want to hear about, but I'm thinking it more of a drop of water that ripples. So I hope that this webinar will serve as a drop of water that will ripple out into your lives and your thoughts. Please complete our evaluation. And as Rachel mentioned, we will work to answer some of the questions that we did not get to today so that you have that information going forward. And based on what you say in the evaluation, Phil's organization, the Department of Health, Department of Agriculture, and others will know what we can do best and next to support you in your communities. So thank you all for coming. It's been marvelous. And do email me if you would like a copy of the recording to share. Thank you. And Eva, could you wave your flag again? Could you wave your flag again for us there in Ireland? Thank you to Ireland. Go have a cuppa now.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.